right, good morning. My name is Dr. Daniel Cross Turner. I'm head of programming and outreach for the Georgetown County Library, and we're here today to welcome you to the FOWL First Thursday for April, and that is the Friends of the Waccamaw Library, our wonderful friends group who support us in so many ways, and especially through the COVID situation. They've been terrific. So if you're not a member of FOWL, our Friends of the Waccamaw Library, please join up and help support us. Thank you so much. And this is First Thursday, and today we're combining First Thursday with our celebration of the wedding anniversary of F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald. This was something we had planned to do last year because it's the 100th anniversary that year. It was, and they were married on April 3rd, 1920, this famous literary couple, Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald. But COVID intervened, and we weren't able to have a full slate of programming there. So we're bringing back a part of that this year. And we did want to say thank you to the wonderful 1920s fashion exhibit, all kind of jewelry and accessories and hats and clothing, flapper dresses, everything else you can imagine, cufflinks, perfumes, and that was provided last year by Michelle Levy up at the Waccamaw Library before COVID shut down. But the rest of the programming had to sort of get tabled until this year, and we're glad to bring back our celebration of the 101st wedding anniversary of F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald. And today we're going to feature Scott Fitzgerald, the male half of this writing and often fighting couple, Scott and Zelda, but they were a dynamic, creative couple. And today we have Dr. Deno Trakas, who is going to talk to us about the perennial appeal of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, this wonderful novel, iconic American novel, first published in 1925, right in the midst of the Roaring '20s, the Jazz Age, which is a term that F. Scott Fitzgerald himself coined. So what makes The Great Gatsby great? Why does this novel, published so long ago, almost 100 years, still resonate so deeply with readers today? And Deno Trakas will discuss this enduring value of F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel, and Dr. Trakas was a student of the preeminent Fitzgerald scholar Matthew J. Bruccoli at the University of South Carolina. And Dr. Trakas is currently Hoy Professor of American Literature up at Wofford College in the Upcountry in Spartanburg, where he teaches a course on F. Scott Fitzgerald, the Jazz Age, and the Depression. Dr. Trakas is the author of 3 books, all of which are based in his native South Carolina. One, a book of poems, Human and Puny, by Hub City Press, wonderful press up there in Spartanburg, that includes watercolors by his sister. The second is a book of nonfiction, Because Memory Isn't Eternal, also by Hub City, and that's about Greek immigrants to the Upcountry and the history there. And finally, he has a novel, Messenger from Mystery, by the University of South Carolina Press, and this is about love and heroism during the Iranian hostage crisis in '79 and '80. So he is very, very much a jack of all trades on the writerly side, Dr. Trakas. And it is April 1st is April Fool's Day, but certainly Dr. Trakas is no fool, and he will educate us on the lasting, enduring value of this wonderful novel, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. So enjoy Dr. Deno Trakas.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Dan, for having the brilliant idea of celebrating the marriage of Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald and asking me to come and be a part of it. Thanks for not giving up after the COVID pandemic canceled this and so many other things in 2020. Thank you for trying again and inviting me to come back again. Thank you for doing this, even though doing it on Zoom isn't nearly as good as doing it in person. A year ago, approximately, some of you might have seen floating on the internet a letter supposedly written from Fitzgerald to Hemingway about the flu. It was a parody. They were making fun of each other and about the flu. But let me just say that according to my research, both Hemingway and Fitzgerald took the Spanish flu pandemic very seriously. It was a pandemic that swept the world in 1918. It killed 50 million people around the world, about 675,000 in the United States alone, as opposed to the 550,000 that have died of COVID here. So a lot more died then. And the population of the United States was only 106 million back then, and it's as opposed to over 330 million today. But enough of the discussion of the flu. I hope that you're all well. I hope you're making plans for July 4th, and I hope you're planning to get back to life as close to normal as possible in the fall. That's hopeful. And I want to begin this address on Fitzgerald with a message of hope. It's fitting since Fitzgerald was the great American dreamer. In fact, that's the name of this video that I'm going to show you that's on the screen. And I don't think I've made it big. There it is. I'm a little bit clumsy with the technology. You will see as we go. But anyway, this video is going to run while I talk. I'm going to start it in just a minute. But if you have, you'll have questions probably about the video or about things that I say. And if you do, Dan is going to explain at the end how you can post the questions on Facebook, or you can write them directly to me. My email address is trakasdp@wofford.edu. Trakas is TRAKASDP @wofford.edu. Let me start the video, and you'll see pictures of the Fitzgeralds. You'll see Fitzgerald as a boy. You'll see him as a teenager. You'll see him as a handsome first lieutenant who convinced the lovely Zelda Sayre to marry him in 1920. And you'll see a lot of images from the Fitzgeralds' lives chronologically. In a minute, it'll start the baby stuff. Chronologically up to and perhaps through the publication of The Great Gatsby in 1925. The main question I want to try to answer today is what accounts for the perennial appeal of The Great Gatsby? It certainly has been popular. It has sold approximately 30 million copies, approximately 300,000 to 500,000 every year, which is more than Fitzgerald sold over his entire career. All of his books over his entire career didn't sell 300,000 copies. If we were together, I would ask for a show of hands. I'd say, how many of you have read The Great Gatsby? And how many of you have read it more than once? And I'm sure that many of you have read it, and some of you have read it more than once. But I'm sure that none of you can compare to my student, Maggie Payne, who has read it at last count 28 times. I asked her what that was about, and she said, I read Fitzgerald for the first time when I was a sophomore in high school, when my honors 2 English teacher told our class that he would be telling us and ruining the ending of The Great Gatsby in hopes of deterring us from reading simply for the plot. I refused to have the ending spoiled, so I finished the novel before we even started it for class. And that year alone, I believe I read the novel cover to cover 5 or 6 times, highlighting almost every page and writing notes to myself. When I asked her why she did this, she said, I can't help but go back to it, The Great Gatsby, whenever I need guidance, reassurance that the American dream, however tainted and difficult it may seem, is real and achievable. I turn to Fitzgerald because his characters are incredibly flawed. I turn to them. Sorry, I think the video stalled. Excuse me for my clumsiness with the technology. That was Edward Fitzgerald, by the way, Fitzgerald's father. He was a dapper, handsome, and very good-mannered man, but not very good at business. So he was often broke. This is his mother, Molly Fitzgerald, who had the money in the family. There wasn't much, but there was some. Anyway, back to Maggie Payne. She said she can't help but go back to The Great Gatsby when she needs guidance, reassurance, and the American dream. She turns to Fitzgerald because his characters are incredibly flawed and broken, and she relates to that. They all want happy endings, but they don't get them. Gatsby doesn't get to ride off into the sunset with Daisy. Also, they're just enough removed from my reality that I don't feel personally called out. I haven't had most of the experience. I've never built a mansion in hopes of attracting the person that I love.
Sorry, I can't help you with that on your Mac.
I don't know what that was. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble, of course, with my computer, of course. Anyway, that's what Maggie says about why she read The Great Gatsby so many times. You're going to see some pictures of Fitzgerald as a teenager in his clubs, and here at Princeton. And in a little while, you'll see a picture of him, a famous picture of him dressed in drag when he performed at Princeton in a play. And he, like many of the guys, had to play the role of girls. And it's kind of funny. You'll see it in a minute. Anyway, I did not read The Great Gatsby in high school. Or if I did, I don't remember the experience. And I want to give credit to Matthew Bruccoli for my love of Fitzgerald. Matthew Bruccoli was the preeminent Fitzgerald scholar in the world, the preeminent Fitzgerald scholar, and my professor at USC in grad school. He liked to tell the story of how, when he was in grad school, he discovered Fitzgerald when he saw a battered copy of The Great Gatsby in a bookstore. He bought it, read it, loved it, and then began collecting Fitzgerald books whenever he had some money. His Fitzgerald collection is now one of the best in the world. It's at the University of South Carolina Library in Columbia. And he donated it to them. It's probably I'm sorry, I'm distracted by the video. Here's Fitzgerald in the play that I mentioned. Anyway, the Matthew Bruccoli Fitzgerald collection is one of the best in the world, maybe second best only to the one at Princeton. Princeton is where Fitzgerald went to college, and it's where he contributed all of his manuscripts, which is why the collection there is so valuable. Today, I have been just retired, but I taught Fitzgerald for 40 years. And I truthfully can say that I love the book. I love The Great Gatsby. And I found something new to admire every time I read it. Bruccoli always said, and I always agreed, that the best reason to read literature is for pleasure. And The Great Gatsby is a great pleasure. First and foremost, I think, because of his characters. There's Nick, of course, our narrator who reserves judgment. And then there's Gatsby, the gangster, who's a hopeless romantic. What a combination that is. There's Daisy, the smart and sensitive rich girl. Her husband, Tom, the privileged, racist, polo-playing drifter. And then there are the wonderful minor characters like the Wilsons, who live in a garage upstairs above a garage in the Valley of Ashes, and the marvelous Meyer Wolfsheim, who reputedly fixed the 1919 World Series and wears cufflinks that are made of human molars. But the novel has an intriguing plot as well. It has mystery, sex, love, adultery, violence. For those who read it in high school or even junior high, it offers idealism. Young people are so often emotionally needy. Their hearts are in a constant turbulent riot, and they want to believe that they can find someone to love them the way Gatsby loves Daisy. For adults, there are different appeals. Fitzgerald deals maturely with the American dream, the idea that anyone can have money and love and happiness. It's part of who we are, the American dream. It's part of our DNA, but it's elusive. We know that. Fitzgerald shows us how easy it is for love to fade or to go awry. He shows us how money, old money, new money, no money, doesn't solve our problems. He shows us that you can't repeat the past. He shows you that you change. We do, Gatsby does, Daisy does, and we have to adapt or there's trouble. So to sum up at this point, the best reason to read literature is for pleasure. The Great Gatsby gives us pleasure because it has great characters, great themes, and a great plot. But there is more. In addition to all I've said, it is beautifully written with graceful turns of phrase, surprising and amazing dialogue, and a structure that creates suspense and drives the plot at a satisfying pace. Even if you're not trained to do close reading, to pick apart a text for symbolism or stylistic techniques, you hear the beauty of Fitzgerald's writing as you read. You hear the tuning fork struck upon a star, which, by the way, is how Fitzgerald describes the moment that Gatsby first kissed Daisy. I'll read that to you in a minute. So let's dig into the book for some of that treasure of craft that brings us pleasure. In the first few pages, Nick describes Gatsby as having a heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, he says, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. You see here one of Fitzgerald's important metaphors. The foul dust that floated in the wake of his dreams suggests that the dreams are a boat, and what's left behind of our dreams is a foul dust. The famous last line of the novel is, "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." This is an example of the Fitzgerald touch, having the ending kiss the beginning with this revisited metaphor, which, by the way, sums up one of the great themes of the novel. We must beat on, boats against the current, even when our dreams elude us, even when all that's left of our dreams is a foul dust. That's why The Great Gatsby is great. The action of the book begins fairly quickly when Nick goes to Tom and Daisy's house, where he meets the lovely but incurably dishonest Jordan Baker, a female pro golfer with whom he will strike up a curious, if serious, relationship. We learn that Tom is having an affair, and Fitzgerald makes us feel sympathy for Daisy, not only because of the affair, but because of the extraordinary things she said on the birth of her baby. She tells Nick, quote, "She was less than an hour old and Tom was God knows where. I woke up out of the ether with an utterly abandoned feeling and asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned away my head and wept. All right, I said, I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. The best thing a girl can be in this world is a beautiful little fool. A beautiful little fool." Isn't that amazing? He took that from Zelda. Zelda said that when she had her daughter, Scotty. This is why Fitzgerald is great, why The Great Gatsby is great. Then at the end of the first chapter, we see Gatsby for the first time, standing out on his lawn, come out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. And Nick sees Gatsby stretch out his arms, trembling toward the water, toward a single green light, minute and far away, that we learn later is at the end of Daisy's dock. And thus we have one of the most famous and effective symbols in American literature. And this is why The Great Gatsby is great. In the next chapter, Tom takes Nick to New York to introduce him to his mistress. What's that about, you might wonder? The mistress, the sensuous Myrtle Wilson, and the reader sees her social ladder climbing dreams, as well as the audacity, immorality, and brutality of her husband, Tom. Not her husband, her lover, Tom. All of this is brushed with a few strokes. Then we see Gatsby's mansion and the first party. Nobody can throw a party like Gatsby, and nobody can describe a party like Fitzgerald. We learn that Gatsby has a library with real books, with uncut pages, meaning they've never been read, meaning Gatsby doesn't read books, but he thinks a man of his stature should have an authentic library. What a perfect telling detail. We also hear rumors about Gatsby, that he killed a man, that he's related to the Kaiser, and we realize that he's totally mysterious. Nick sits beside him at dinner, talks about the war, and doesn't even realize that he's talking to Gatsby, the host of the party. One of the most successful qualities of the novel, one of the things that makes it great, is how the identity of Gatsby unfolds slowly and mysteriously. After the party, Gatsby invites Nick to lunch in New York. And on the way, he tells Nick about himself, about being raised by wealthy parents in the Midwest. When Nick, who's from the Midwest, asks him, "Oh, where?" He says, "San Francisco," which of course isn't in the Midwest. Gatsby also tells Nick about being in the war, about collecting precious stones, about hunting big game. And Nick thinks Gatsby's lying about everything. He wants to laugh in Gatsby's face. Until Gatsby pulls out a photo of himself at Oxford and a medal he has that he was awarded during the war. So Nick, and the reader, is shocked. And he thinks that it must be true. Gatsby calls Nick old sport. This is brilliantly done. Then we meet the marvelous Meyer Wolfsheim, one of my favorite characters, minor characters in all of literature. He talks fondly of his memories of a gang murder at the restaurant across the street. And then he says to Nick, "I understand you're looking for a business connection." You see that when I say that the writing of The Great Gatsby is great, I don't just mean poetic or pretty. I mean sharp, exact, powerful. It is the very middle, then in the very middle of the book, we have the fulcrum on which it all turns, the reunion of Gatsby and Daisy. After Gatsby, after embarrassment and unreasoning joy, he's consumed with the wonder of her presence. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set at an inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwhelmed clock. This clock reminds us of the defunct clock that Gatsby knocked off the mantle at Nick's house. And we sense that it might be a symbol, and time might be a theme in the book. Not knowing what he's doing, Gatsby takes Daisy next door to his fabulous mansion and shows her his shirts. Daisy cries. She says, "They're such beautiful shirts. It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before." I love this scene, but only Carey Mulligan, Leonardo DiCaprio's Daisy, plays it correctly. She makes it clear that that's not the reason that Daisy is crying. Her husband, Tom, has beautiful shirts too. She's sad because she realizes how utterly smitten Gatsby has been with her for 5 years. The colossal vitality of his illusion, it had all gone beyond her, beyond everything. And she hadn't been thinking of him at all. Finally, Gatsby is able to invite Daisy to one of his parties, which, we infer, he'd been having just on the hope that she would drift into one. But after it's over, Gatsby tells Nick that she didn't like it, and he's right. But Nick seeks to reassure him and says, "I wouldn't ask too much of her. You can't repeat the past." And Gatsby says famously, "Can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can." But we know that of course you can't. In an effort to convince Nick and himself, he tells Nick the story of how he met her and how he knew that it was life-changing. Just as he's about to kiss her, he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. Gatsby and Daisy become reckless. She invites Gatsby and Nick over to her house. Nick says to Gatsby in a private moment, her voice is indiscreet. It's full of, and Gatsby fills in the answer. It's full of money. That poignant and perfect comment leads us to the famous confrontation at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Gatsby is confident. Daisy only needs to tell Tom that she never loved him. Then he can whisk her away and they can live the last 5 years the way that they should have. But she can't say it. She can only say, "I did love him once, but I loved you too." Gatsby, crushed, responds, "You loved me too?" Showing how much she's hurt him. Later, Gatsby will say to Nick, of course, she might have loved him once just for a minute when they were first married, and loved me more even then, do you see? In any case, it was just personal. Just personal? What could he mean by that astounding sentence? He means, I think, that Daisy's love for Tom was colossal, heavenly, all-consuming. Like her love for Gatsby, No, it was just personal. That's why The Great Gatsby is great. On the way home from New York, Fitzgerald uses a clever plot device to have the characters driving different cars, which leads to an accident, and their lives are changed once again. Nick finds himself on Gatsby's side and says of Tom and Daisy and Jordan too, quote, "They're a rotten crowd. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together." After the accident, Gatsby waits for a call from Daisy, but Nick tells us that Gatsby himself probably didn't believe it would come, and perhaps he no longer cared. If that was true, he must have felt that he had lost the old warm world, paid a high price for living too long with a single dream. And we nod. We know that's true. Gatsby's funeral is great too. Nobody comes. Not Tom, not Daisy, not Wolfsheim, not any of those hundreds who attended his fabulous parties, except for one, Owl Eyes, and Gatsby's father, and Nick. Owl Eyes, commiserating with Nick, says, "The poor son of a bitch." When Scott Fitzgerald died in 1940 in Hollywood, almost broke, almost abandoned, almost unknown, one of his few friends, the writer Dorothy Parker, looked down on his body as he laid at rest at the funeral home and said, quoting the book, "The poor son of a bitch." Before the book ends, Nick runs into Tom in New York, shows him his contempt, and remarks later, quote, "They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made." But in the end, Nick shakes Tom's hand and watches as Tom goes into a jewelry store to buy some cufflinks. And we think of Meyer Wolfsheim's human molars, another perfect detail. Reviews of The Great Gatsby were mixed. One called it a dud, whereas another called it brilliant. Commercially, it was a disappointment, selling half as many copies as his first novel, which is inconceivable to us now. Matthew Bruccoli thought the novel was a masterpiece. I think it was and is great, which is why I taught it for 40 years at Wofford. I just retired and now I find myself spending time chasing my grandchildren, and I doubt that I will read it again. But I have committed so much of it to memory because it is so memorable that I will live with it always. And I love to talk about it. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from some of you. So we beat on as ever. Thank you.